Today I would just like to give you some practical examples and tips related to doing Dawah in Hungary, and the kind of communities we have here, so that you have an overview of that. So first of all, when it comes, of course we have non-Muslims. Some of those are going to be religious in some sense. They might believe in God but not practice. Maybe they pray very rarely, or sometimes they might go to a church or a synagogue or whatever, depending on their religion. We have people who are atheists. We have people who kind of just curious, or maybe they just don't really deal with religion in general, but they're not super bothered to kind of label that, and that's not really part of their life or journey right now. So they can also be, for example, open-minded regarding who you are and your culture or your religion. So we have these kinds of people when it comes to the non-Muslims. When it comes to Muslims, we have people from different countries, different cultures. When it comes to the various cultures, it's important to consider that we have different backgrounds, and so we grew up with a specific understanding of what Islam is. Now, whilst Muslims who convert to Islam in a non-Muslim country, they must learn about their own cultures. What are the things that are actually not something that Allah encourages for us to do, but people do? And so our convert sisters and brothers and sisters, they will slowly work on leaving behind parts of their culture which they know is haram to do, and they will work on maybe, even though their families sometimes are against them changing your lifestyle really when you become Muslim, but they take on this task. What can be important to consider is that while they take this step, people who come from Muslim countries, so-called Muslim countries, with a kind of a culture that has some Islam in it, for those people it's also important to learn and recognize the difference between Islam and between those cultures, because sometimes there are countries which practice things which is not in Islam, or it is against Islamic values, and so they have to as well face and come to terms with the differences. So it's so difficult. I know for converts it can be quite a difficult journey, but it's clearer because you have a non-Muslim culture and you have Islam. So the differences are so clear. When you come from Muslim culture, it can be very difficult to understand the fact that my home country, where I learned that we're Muslim, where I learned this is the normal thing to do, where I learned that this is our culture, that apparently that country is not actually in line with the Islamic values sometimes. And so it's a journey of self-reflection, it's a journey learning about Islam. And this is important because when you're working with these different types of people, you have to understand that sometimes people do certain things and they believe this is correct because that's what they were brought up to think, and they were brought up in a country that claimed to be Muslim. So of course they might not question those practices until later on. I know some of my friends, for example, I know that in Tunisia, it is a common practice for people to shake hands or give each other kisses on the cheek between men and women, even if you're not mahram. And so I know that for them, when they learned that this is actually not part of Islam, they had to take a stance, even within the family, with distant relatives, to say, actually, I'm not going to do that anymore because it's not part of what we're taught in Islam. And so that can be really difficult. So having the understanding, the rahmah towards people, and understanding that it is not easy when we're talking about religion, when we're talking about change, when we're talking about changing ourselves and our behaviors, it's not so simple. Don't just give someone information, well, in Islam this is the right thing and you're doing the wrong thing. That's not how we do dawah. That's not how you call someone to the truth. You have to understand that there is more going on, and that it's going to be a process, and it's going to take time, and it's going to take effort. And for some people, certain specific Islamic practices are much more easier than others. For example, in such a case, if you're close to your family, you don't want to put a strain on your relationship with your family, and at the same time you wish to please Allah. This is an internal struggle, and this can be they're tough for different people. And there are other countries, for example, I know that there are certain people in Syria who didn't and don't believe that hijab is part of the Muslim dress. So if they start to wear hijab or be more practicing in that sense, and even people, for example, in Turkey, and there are so many other countries, if you all of a sudden start wearing hijab, or if hijab is the norm and you all of a sudden start wearing an abaya, which is not the norm, then it can be a struggle for them to actually come back home, and the family will say, oh well, you've become such an extremist, or you're pretending like you're this high and mighty sheikh but you're not. So it can be tough sometimes to be put in this position, and so when we speak to people, it's really important to consider the context and where they're coming from, and to approach certain subjects as, let's talk about what is in Islam. It's so important. Let's be clear about what is halal, what's haram, and let's be clear that this is not the only two options. Sometimes we have things, for example, which are disliked, but not necessarily a big sin. In other times we might talk about extra deeds that we're doing, which if you're not doing that, it's not a sin on you, but if you did that, it would be such a blessing for you. So it's really lovely, and it's really great, and it's really amazing for your soul if you can learn about those things and start implementing them in your life. Sorry, I'm going downstairs, so it's looking down a lot. So we have to be careful about those things.